Good morning on this fourth Sunday in May. We are so glad you have joined us today. I'm Martha Sincula, your service leader. Welcome to the Umpqua Unitarian Universalist congregation. And as I look out in the sanctuary, I really miss seeing all of you. And as more and more of us become vaccinated, we can look ahead to opening our congregation. The Sunday Services and Music Committee and the board are working together to determine a safety for all timeline for opening. In the meantime, take a moment to check in with each other. I want to remind all of you that our congregational meeting is today, Sunday, at 12:45, right after the sermon discussion, which ends at 12:30. The link is the same as the Zoom discussion. Our speaker today is Michael Wheeler, our director of music, who will be available after the sermon for the discussion, at which we check in at 11:15. Conversation begins at 11:30. And if you do miss the after-service discussion, they're recorded just like our services. You can view them anytime on YouTube. Services are generally uploaded on Saturday nights. And in addition to our services and discussions, we also have meditations and interviews. There's a lot to check out. We thank Michael Wheeler and Lucy Swangham for their work on producing these programs every week. Great job, guys. Thank you. We begin our service with our chalice lighting. The words today are called Drawn Together by Jennifer Leota Gray. We come together every week, bound not by a creed or a mutual desire to please one God or many gods. Yet we are drawn together by a belief that how we are in the world and who we are together matters. We light this chalice together in the knowledge that love, not fear, can change this world. Our opening words this morning are by Kirk Dirtston. Now think about how you feel when you see something very beautiful. There is a compulsion to acknowledge and respond to it. It could be a gorgeous sunset or a powerful musical score that moves the audience to tears. If you consider that the more beautiful something is, the more powerful the compulsion to respond. To see infinite beauty would be like subjecting a thin wire to an infinite voltage.
There lived a family of one father and 3 sons. The father was good and kind. He imagined a peaceful life, full of prosperity and kindness for his young ones. The father would often entertain himself while toiling in the fields, imagining the lives of his offspring discovering new places, learning to love the stories he loved, learning new and interesting things, dancing, teaching, and falling in love. This brought him a sense of joy in an otherwise mundane day. Each of the children was 1 year apart in age, the oldest being 4, the second being 3, and the youngest being 1. He was an only parent as his wife passed away during the birth of their youngest. Sadly, one day, war came to the countryside, and the father was conscripted to fight in protection of the land. Sadder still, The father did not return from this battle. Because resources were scarce in the countryside, no one family could care for all of the children, so they were divided up between 3 families, all separated by great distances. The families, however, were noble in spirit and never hid from the children that they were adopted. They would tell stories of their good and kind father as best they were able, although, not knowing much about the man, there were many questions they could not answer. The children grew up wise and strong. Though their youthful impetuousness often led them to making mistakes, still, upon reaching adulthood, it was obvious that the families who cared for them had done a good job in raising such fine young people. The eldest sought fortunes in the city and earned a lot of money, enough money to start a family of his own. He was happy and content. The second child decided to go into politics. As a natural negotiator, he was able to mediate many trials between people and became well respected as a man of wisdom. The youngest took to the farm of his adopted family, working in the fields just as his father had done. Though life brought many hardships for the 3 sons over their lifetime, all 3 of them lived with a sense of fulfillment and looked forward to each day. Still, there was something missing in each of them. Each of the 3 brothers knew they had 2 siblings they hadn't seen since their father's death. Now, in old age, they decided to set out in search of the others. The oldest, with the most means, hired scribes and researchers to pore through what records of adoption there were. Since the middle child was in the public eye, he was easy to find. After much inquiry, the youngest was likewise found. Corresponding, they decided that they should meet at least once before their lives ended. When they met, after tears of joy and telling their own individual stories, the conversation turned to their parents. It was decided each of the 3 brothers wanted to be able to share the same aspects of their mother and father with their own families. The eldest wanted the father's story to be one of the courageous warrior sent off to defend the country. This was logical, as he had the most memories of his parents being the eldest. The middle child thought it was better to remember both his parents as the loving caregivers who worked to give their family the best life possible. Much debate ensued, and the 2 were vexed that neither one could see the other's point of view. Finally, the youngest spoke up. He said, "The truth is, while we can speculate our father was brave and our mother kind, we don't really know. Not really." He continued, "Perhaps the best honor we can give to our parents is that we are of them. And being of them, we sought each other out to meet here and talk about them. And perhaps the fact that we are meeting here together, though we could be with our own families, we found it necessary to gather at least once, means that those are the qualities from which we spring. And in the end, that is the best homage we can give to them, simply to be together as we would have been under the same roof all those years ago." The 2 older brothers nodded in agreement, and all went home.
Now is a time in our service for reflection. Find a comfortable position. Feel the tensions in your body. Relax. As we take a slow breath in, breathe in peace. And a slow breath out, breathe out love. Peace, love. Let us gather our energies as we participate in our meditation. Listen to the words, spend some time in silence, and enjoy the music. The song I came to sing remains unsung to this day. I have spent my days in stringing and unstringing my instrument. The time has not come true. The words have not been rightly set. Only there is the agony of wishing in my heart. I have not seen his face, nor have I listened to his voice. Only I have heard his gentle footsteps from the road before my house. But the lamp has not been lit, and I cannot ask him into my house. I live in the hope of meeting with him, but this meeting is not yet. Tagore. Our speaker today is Michael Wheeler, our director of music. He's lived in Oregon for over 10 years, and he's one who cares for humanity. Michael?
Greetings and a very happy Sunday to everyone. I hope you'll forgive the casual attire, as all of my dress shirts are currently in storage because I'm moving. So I wanted to start by talking about the title. Why titled Clarifying My Theology, as opposed to what would be a better title, Clarifying Our Theology? And I was thinking back to when I was a college professor and I was teaching audio recording. And often I would show students examples of my own work, my own songs, or my own recordings that I'd made, not because my recordings represented the pinnacle of audio excellence, far from that is far from the truth, but more that I could speak with some degree of authority when I was talking about my own work. And so if they had questions about what it is I was doing or I was trying to do, I was well equipped to answer them. And this is a similar mindset that I have here. It's not to say that I have any answers. I think you'll come to find out that I really don't, but more that this can be a leaping off point to discussion where maybe if we work hard, you can sharpen your own view of theology and some of these subjects. The truth is, what lies beyond our understanding is a topic that is deeply fascinating to me. It's something that I've discussed before and even in recording sermons, but often I would leave the topic of God up to the listener. And my reasoning for doing this again was it's not so important. This is what I thought anyway, that it wasn't so important to know what I believe personally as the presenter, because my faith journey is my own, as your faith journey is your own, but that it's your views more that I wanted to hear. Now, of course, this has led to some confusion in discussions, especially in our post-service discussions, where because I've been so vague about what I believe, that I think some people adopted the idea that somehow I had turned into this conservative Christian, which is just an utterly hilarious idea to me, because you just have to talk with me for 5 minutes to know that that's not the case. But that's beside the point. You can couple that with the fact that I don't like to posture on things I don't know. And there is more things than not in the universe that falls under that umbrella. But I was contrasting this with some of the talks that have been given and some of my colleagues who would invoke things as a way of delivering certitude on what it was they believed about theology or the universe or life after death, and subjects of that nature. Now, it's vitally important that you understand I do not mean this as a criticism of any other person who takes this lectern. But when we start to invoke things like quantum physics in order to bolster our own beliefs, I that's a very troubling thing for me. And the reason it's troubling for me is, having been in the collegiate world for so long, I can tell you that on this planet, there's really only a handful of people who understand a subject like quantum physics. It's one of those disciplines that is so far beyond the scope of human understanding that to casually use it to talk about the nature of the universe from a religious standpoint or a spiritual standpoint, I don't think it serves us. So here's a question with no small ramification in how we answer it. And that question is the old one: do you believe in God? The philosophical answer to this question would be to examine further: what do you mean by believe, and what do you mean by God? If we look at belief, which is the realm of epistemology in philosophy, we could start to ask questions about what that entails, and if indeed it is possible to give over belief into something unverifiable. If we're talking about belief in the physical, take for instance, and this is taken from Matt Dillahunty's discourses, he's a very popular atheist. What he said is, if I tell you I have $20 in my pocket, you may take me at my word for it. You could, if you wanted to, ask to examine my wallet to prove that I had $20 in it, but would that really be necessary? After all, you know that I'm employed. You know that I do have an income. And so it is at least conceivable to you that I have $20 in my wallet. Furthermore, you know that $20 bills exist about as certainly as you can know anything. So it's very easy to take somebody at their word for something like that. But when we're talking about belief in the unverifiable, is it possible, and I wish I had an answer for this, I really don't, is it possible to truly give over belief into something that you cannot test? Now, the other part of that question is God. What are we talking about when we're talking about God? We have used the word God, or I have used the word God, in many, many different contexts. We had not too long ago members of our church who proclaimed a belief in old deities, like the Norse deities. We had one person stand up in church and say that they're a follower of Zeus, which for me is perfectly reasonable. If you're going to believe in extra dimensional or extra worldly beings, it seems like Zeus is just as valid a belief as believing in Indra or the sun god, or Ra, I guess, or or Mithra, or any of the other deities that people have worshipped over the eons. But we've also used God to discuss concepts like the universe, or intention, or collective goodwill among people. I have used God to describe what our highest aspirations could be. So, in some ways, from a philosophical standpoint, it's no small question to ask somebody, do you believe in God? On the other hand, this would seem like really just a bit of pedantry to go into these kinds of examinations, because the truth is, living in the Western world, a principally Judeo-Christian culture, most of us know exactly what somebody means when they're talking about belief in God. And that is, do you believe in an omnipotent, omniscient being responsible for the creation of at least the world, but more likely the universe, who is personal, and you can know this being, and this being has an interest in your well-being? And to that question, dear congregation members, beloved community, all I can say is, I don't know. So that'll do it for me. I hope you all have a beautiful Sunday, and let's talk about this in our meeting. Thank you very much. Okay. There is somebody who's not going to appreciate that joke at all. I already know it, but I couldn't help myself. The truth is, it's not a small question. The truth is, it is not pedantic to talk about the nature of belief and the nature of God if we're trying to climb that impossible mountain that leads us to some understanding of our own systems of belief that get us through our lives, or at least through each day. And because there is such an enormous impact on life that the answers to these questions have, I think it's worth examining. And if you will indulge me, I would like to talk about evidence for a personal God. Now, I could just as easily adopt an atheist perspective, but I have been, in this phase of my life, very concerned with the affirmative. So humor me and let me talk about evidence for a transcendent God. So this takes us back to what we discussed in our post-service discussion last week, where Bonnie and Andy were talking about stepping into the unknown, taking that step of faith into what might otherwise be potentially dangerous, but certainly a frightening chance that you could take on your life. And one of the things that I brought up in that discussion was Jiddu Krishnamurti's book, Freedom from the Known. And it's based off of this idea that it is possible to transcend what it is we've experienced into the completely novel. Let me explain that a little bit. There is an idea in human psychology that human beings cannot conceive of things they don't have some experience with. So, take for instance, I'll give you a mundane example. We live in homes. Homes, for the most part, have four walls to protect us from shelter. It has our modern amenities that don't exist in the natural world, like running water and cooking utensils, things like that. But if we were to step back in time, we would find that people lived in homes of an earlier design. Take, for instance, the cottage. Now, maybe the floor would be dirt, maybe it wouldn't be carpeted, maybe it would be four walls without our modern amenities, but it's still something that protects us from the shelter, from the elements of the natural world. Flashback further in time, and maybe our ancestors settled in tents, or even further back in caves. Each of these structures provided the same kind of protection that then we took in our conscious mind and figured out ways to improve upon. And you may think to yourself, okay, fair enough. Everything that's been invented in the world comes from some predecessor, and that's true. But what about instinct? Instinct is a very peculiar phenomenon that occurs in evolution. And for that, again, this is something that I've talked about quite a bit, is the idea of evolutionary psychology, is that there are certain behaviors that are encoded into our genetics, those that are beneficial are passed on. Those that are harmful tend not to be passed on. And therefore, we have certain behaviors, such as communal living to some degree. Um, it is no small coincidence that in our moral understanding of the world, it necessitates more than one person. So, an individual living out in the wilderness by themselves cannot be said to be a moral or an immoral agent, because morality necessitates being in contact with another person and having your actions positively or negatively affect the existence of another person. And so my idea, and it's not my idea, the idea that I'm postulating here is that somewhere along the way, a communal sense of humanity had to develop in order to ensure our survival. So these are the premises that I want to challenge. Because the truth is that there have been times where it seems that individuals are able to break through and indeed have freedom from the known. They're able to break through and create something that is, if not completely novel, it's novel in its conception, or it's novel in its delivery. And for all of us who took our history of Western art as freshmen in university, you may remember one painter, Bosc. Now, his paintings are irrefutably nightmarish. That this is not the kind of landscape that you would be happy to find yourself in. And indeed, what Bosch is presenting here is a vision of hell. But the interesting thing is that Bosch lived in the medieval period. This is long, long before the advent of surrealism, which is something that is at least a curiosity to us. The surrealists looked back to Bosch as an innovator and somebody that they could emulate in some ways. But you look at images like this, and it's easy to understand that the realm of the imagination is much deeper and much more fertile than anything that we ever really could, well, imagine. And I think that the most poignant example of how imagination delivers messages to us that are indeed novel is in the realm of dreams. That if you are a lucid dreamer, for sure, but even if you're able to just remember your dreams, um, there is a lot of inquiry as to where these come from. If you're not a lucid dreamer, it's very common for you to be a character completely unaware of your waking life while you're asleep. You may be existing in a time long past. You may be existing in the future. This may be another dimension. We don't really know how these images that we have when we're asleep come to be, at least not with any sense of certainty. We can speculate. And there's a lot of speculation in terms of, are they messages that our subconscious is trying to deliver to us? Are they messages from God? Are they memories of past lives? All of these are very, very fruitful questions. And I think that dreams take us one step further into understanding the infinite, because it is, in a very real way, a break with reality. And how the idea of the infinite could, in some ways, refute the idea of God, meaning that if God is an omnipotent, infinite being who exists infinitely, either creating infinite time or space or existing alongside infinite time and space, then we have the old philosophical problem of the infinite regress. What that means is that if time stretches back into infinity, we would never be able to reach now in time. And this is why it's so valuable to have these kinds of questions, because how do we explain that we can conceptualize the idea of infinity without having an experience of infinity? if indeed human beings can only conceptualize that which they've come in contact with, then there must be, on some level, infinity within us or a part of us. And this again, these are concepts that philosophers have tried to tackle for a very, very long time. One of the books that has been just utterly invaluable in my life is Boethius's The Consolation of Philosophy, where in the latter chapters of the book, Boethius tries to tackle the problem of evil. And again, this is something that I think most of you know very, very well, and it's that if God is capable of stopping evil, but he chooses not to, then he is malevolent. If he is wanting to stop evil, but is not capable, then he's not omnipotent, right? If God is both unable and unwilling to stop evil, then why call him God? And Boethius tried to explain this by saying that time for God does not happen the way that it does for us. Essentially, what he's saying is that time exists in a kind of three-dimensional chessboard for God. And this is also something that the book of Job, if you read the book of Job, it kind of hints at this, that in order for all of the chess pieces to move into the final arrangement that is God's perfect plan, then things have to happen for us on a linear landscape, but for God, it's this giant cosmic contraption that he's putting together. One of the great joys in the past couple of months that I've been enjoying is the NBC television show called The Good Place. And just very briefly, it's a story about four people who have died, and they wake up after their death to find themselves in heaven. And only to find out that there are infinite struggles in heaven as there are on Earth, and through their friendship and through their mutual support, they're able to transcend it. It's a very, very worthwhile show if you get a chance to watch it. It's on Netflix. And one of the moments in the show that I appreciate so much is where Ted Danson's character, he plays this architect of the afterlife, and he's talking about how time moves in the afterlife, and he says, well, it's a Jeremy Bearimy. And nobody has any idea what he's talking about. So he writes out the name in cursive, Jeremy Bearimy, and he says that this is how time moves in the afterlife. It just happens to look like the cursive name in English, Jeremy Bearimy. And in the last name Bearimy, there's an I, and there's a dot on the I, whereas everything is very squiggly and it all flows together and loops back around, but there exists this tiny circular dot over the I of the last name Bearimy. And the philosopher character in the show says, I don't understand that dot. What does that dot mean? And Ted Danson's character says, oh yeah, well that's special. That dot is it's Tuesdays and it's July. Basically, it's the place where nothing never happens. And I thought that was fantastic because, in a way it's nonsense, but in another way, it could describe the complexity of what you're trying to look at when you're looking at the infinite, and how there are necessarily contrary ideas that would seem to cancel each other out if we're talking about the infinite. But it's funny that we should have that kind of a representation in a television show, because that's why art is so valuable, is that it allows us to explore freedom from the known through different dimensions. Think about it this way. If we wanted to explore three dimensions, we have sculpture. If we wanted to explore two dimensions, we have paintings, maybe to a lesser degree film. But if we wanted to explore one dimension, what do we have? And for me, the only thing that I can think of that allows our three-dimensional minds to explore one dimension is music and story. So the biggest point about this is that none of what I've said is irrefutable evidence for the existence of the type of God that was set out in the first section of the talk, which is why each religion on the planet that postulates a supernatural being demands some kind of faith. There is some notion of a faith commandment. And I used to be so jealous when I went through a deeply Christian phase when I was a teenager, because I had challenges of faith. And I thought to myself, if only I were born in the times of the prophets or the church apostles, then I would not have the issues of faith in believing in God that I do now, because all of these wonderful stories, when they took place, how could you see these miraculous things? How could you come face to face with God as some of these people did and have doubts? Now, of course, the funny thing is that if I would have read the stories more, I would have found out that even in times where people are supposedly coming face to face with God, they do have doubts. They still have doubts, and you don't need that much of an imagination to say that if God came to you face to face, you might say, "Oh, geez, what kind of mushrooms were in that pizza?" Or what, did somebody slip me a drug? Am I hallucinating? Is this an alien? Um, am I crazy? These are all ways that you could challenge your faith ad infinitum, right? There's no reason to believe things with the kind of certainty that we imagine that we would have if only the universe would meet us in our demands for verification. And that's really why epistemology matters so much, is to say, how do we know what we believe? How do we know what we know without spiraling into an endless series of what if questions? And when you get to that end of the endless series of what if questions, what are you left with but faith? And I think this is why there is the notion that no one can truly see God's face, is because our inquisitive minds, our three-dimensional minds, our material minds demand the kind of satisfaction that we can find verifiability against all questions ever. And that's just not possible in this existence, or at least it's not possible yet. And I think that knowing God, or knowing the universe, knowing our highest aim, however we choose to describe it, would be in that realm. Think of the Tagore poem, which Martha read for the meditation, that I have not seen his face, but I know his footsteps. And that, my friends, is faith. But is it possible to see the face of God? I don't know, but I think I can offer you something. And it goes like this, because we haven't even scratched the surface of our understanding of this world. So when what we believe becomes just as verifiable as what we know, and when what we know is just as inspiring as what we believe, then we will have begun to see the face of God. But what we can do is to gather together, as those three brothers did in the story earlier on, and discuss what it was exactly from which we came. And for real now. I hope you have a beautiful Sunday. Take care.
Our closing words today are by Kurt Dirdston. Just as we have done for beauty, we could then go through the same exercise for justice, as well as joy, honor, music, love, purity, and more. Each attribute, by itself, in its pure and infinite form, would instantly overwhelm and annihilate our finite, mortal capability to handle and respond to it. Then roll all those attributes together into something inconceivable and conceivably mind-blowing. Perhaps this gives us insight into another ancient statement about God. You cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live. Go now in peace, and blessed be.